Joana here. Thank you for joining us for another Exhibitionistas episode dedicated to Leap Year, a survey of the South Korean artist Haegui Young at the Hayward Gallery. Emily and I recorded this episode for the first and probably the last time during the week in the late afternoon, rather than in the early hours of a Sunday. And there is a certain chaotic energy to it, as Emily and I are morning people. I don't know if you'll notice it, but it is the first episode where I lost it and laughed for what felt like a very long time. Because it was me who breached exhibition etiquette this time. And as Emily rightly pointed out, I was the one who dedicated a whole episode last season to this very subject. So now, my usual reminder for you to feel the holiday spirit and subscribe to our Patreon page for less than a latte or a pint. Supporting us is also supporting those who cannot pay but still want to enjoy the podcast without ads. It makes a huge difference for us because we're an independent podcast, unlike most of the ones you listen to, which are part of media platforms. Your help allows us to grow and to produce even better episodes for you. The link to the page is, as always, in the show's notes. So go ahead and be Christmassy or Hanukkah. And now let's move on to the episode.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Exhibitionistas. This is the podcast where we go to exhibitions so that you have to. My name is Emily Harding. I'm an art lover and an exhibition goer. I'm so glad you could join us for this episode about Haegue Yang. She currently has a show called Leap Year taking place at the Hayward Gallery in London until the 5th of January, 2025. So I am not going to bury the lead here and just say, go see it. And if you can't be in London to see this show, check out her work any way that you can. You will not regret it. I mean, I was just so blown away. I mean, I can't say that this exhibition changed my life, but by the end, I felt like I had traversed my own interior and that I'd traveled to South Korea. So, and been on many travels with her, quite frankly. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to let my lovely co-host introduce herself.
Well, hello, exhibitionistas. I am Joana Neves, independent writer and curator, artistic director of Drawing Now Paris. And I'm so glad that you are this enthusiastic, Emily, because last time I almost thought that we'd lost you. So welcome back. Welcome back.
It's true. I am more enthusiastic about this than I was our previous exhibition we visited.
I think we're going to lose a few friends with the previous episode.
That's okay.
So this is the first time we are covering an exhibition at the Hayward Gallery, if you can believe it.
Yeah.
I remember that almost a year ago, I was so happy to visit their show of Hiroshi Sugimoto's work, Japanese conceptual photographer. And now we are going to South Korea and Germany with the amazing Haegui Young. But first, as ever, what other cultural things have you been delving into, Emily, this week?
Yeah.
How has your week been?
Yeah, well, it hasn't been as joyous as visiting the Haegue Yang exhibition, I gotta say, given the US election results and doing lots of digesting and thinking about that and all of the developments that are taking place. So we're recording this a couple weeks after the election results were announced. But so I've been doing a lot of thinking, along with loads of other people, of course, about what this kind of means. And it brought me back to the work of Robert Putnam, who some people might have heard of the work Bowling Alone. He's a Harvard professor, and he wrote a paper originally in the late 90s that looked at this whole notion of social capital and the fact that the US was losing it. President Clinton at the time was a big fan of his, and he turned that paper into a book called Bowling Alone, which is essentially what you imagine it to be. It's like Americans are not joining bowling leagues anymore. They're just doing it on their own. And that that goes for all sorts of civic institutions, labor unions, etc., civic groups, obviously religious institutions that people were no longer joining into, living more atomized lives. That book, Bowling Alone, is basically looking at the mid 60s to the late 90s where social capital went down. When I was working at the US Congress, this was like required reading in the office that I worked in. It was like,
You don't say, really?
yeah, it's really fascinating. I mean, if anybody, this is not a this is not a
It's
politics
not a
or
plug for
yeah,
politics, for
yeah.
political books. But why
Exactly.
not? Why not?
Yeah, yeah. So his research is that now looking at how did we build all that social capital in the first place? So at the end of the 1800s in the US
Hmm.
and lots of places, we had the Gilded Age. So we had very,
Mm,
very rich people and very, very poor people.
mm.
And that is happening again now, that huge gulf between what people like Elon Musk make and regular folks has only exacerbated massively. So he's saying, well, if we're in that same position, what can we learn about how we got ourselves out of that Gilded Age, and is it possible to do it again? So that's helping me feel a little bit more hopeful about the world, at least.
And could art perhaps bridge that gap?
You know what? It could. I mean, honestly, it's like, I think the notion of going and seeing exhibitions together, seeing art together, talking about it together. I mean, obviously, podcasts are part of that atomized culture, right? I mean, people listen to them on their own, usually, on a run or doing the dishes or what have you. But art, in and of itself, and the institution of, absolutely can play a part in bringing people together.
Listen, he is wishing that art will still play a part in American society from January on. And speaking of bridging the gap, so this is the week where Maurizio Cattelan's banana was sold
Oh, I heard
for
about
about
this.
6 million or $6.5 million.
Yeah, the art
So it's
newspaper had something on that, didn't they?
so, our colleague Ben Luke just
Yeah.
posted on this Instagram an article he wrote 5 years ago, I think, or a few years ago about the famous banana. So, to explain, the piece in itself is a banana, a real banana, taped onto the wall with scotch tape. Not scotch tape, with duct tape. And it's called Comedian.
Okay.
It's a fun pun, obviously, because I had forgotten the title, and because it kind of came back, I was thinking, that's not a bad title, actually. It kind of almost elevates such a silly joke, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so the person who bought this work is a Chinese crypto bro, as Ben Luke puts
Mm,
it. I may be
mm-hmm.
misquoting him, but I remember the word bro. And he's very happy to buy it. He's gonna eat the banana as soon as he installs it or gets it, because
Really?
obviously what you get when you buy this is a certificate, and we talked about this in the last episode. So any work that has ephemeral elements into it, obviously you have to remake it all the time. There's a piece by Giovanni Anselmo, if I'm not mistaken, in the Pompidou collection, that is a sort of like a funereal plinth, almost in marble, with
Mm-hmm.
a lettuce on top of it. So obviously the lettuce needs to be replaced all the time. It's not such a wild thing, in the art world. And as far as materials go, it has been done and redone. It's not something new. But the fact that it is just a banana and it's duct tape and it's such a speculative operation by this point, this comedian piece,
Yeah.
brings the art world again into the general press, which is not great, because that's the point where, whatever you think of Maurizio Catalan, that's where we lose people,
Yeah, that makes sense.
because
Yeah.
that's what people take from contemporary art, you know. So I was reading in this blog, this kind of feminist gossip blog, the banana got to it. You know, it has
Oh,
nothing about
wow.
feminism, nothing about anything. It has no relation whatsoever to the premise of the website. And the person was writing, and believe it or not, what you buy when you buy the banana is a piece of paper
Yeah.
and a certificate. And it's, you know, for us in the art world, it's so normal. It's such a normal
Mm.
thing, almost, not for everyone, but maybe in the contemporary art world. And so I think that's the point where things are not, you know, they're not bridged. That's where we lose a lot of people.
Hmm. And then they can sort of cast it as silly and extreme, and I mean, people are spending all of this money on that, and yeah, exactly. I mean, I feel like this show that we're going to talk about, though, is the embodiment of like what contemporary art can do and really relate to people, because I felt like I related to it so
Yes,
deeply.
I'm so curious to hear about that, Emily, because, you know, I've been looking at the reviews of the show. Time Out, The Guardian, really bad reviews.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh gosh,
two
I didn't.
stars, one
Huh.
star. Yeah, I'm quite surprised, and I can't put my finger on it.
Huh. Wow, that's so interesting. Because I mean, my husband Peter, he, enjoys art, but he's definitely not going with me to every single one. But this was one that even before I said we were going to go talk about this, he was like, "I want to go to that one." He was really drawn to it.
Do you want to talk, you know, just contextualize the artist a
Sure.
little bit, Haegue Young, for our listeners?
Sure, sure. So I'll preface this by saying there isn't a ton out there sort of about her upbringing, and other than the bits you find in the catalog and other gallery profiles, etc. But there's lots of interviews with her, and they are well worth it, where she sort of talks about her work quite exclusively. But what we do know, I mean, so she was born in Seoul, South Korea in 1971. She grew up with parents that were both writers and labor activists. Korea at the time was ruled by a military dictator, Park Chung-hee, that took power in 1961, so 10 years before she was born, and was assassinated in 1979. Her father was dismissed from his job as a journalist, along with hundreds of others, for protesting censorship under the dictator. And he ended up in construction. And he ended up working in North Africa. I think it was Libya and maybe Tunisia. But he ended up working in North Africa, which a lot of folks from Asian backgrounds did at the time, mostly in the Gulf. The Gulf was certainly,
Hmm.
kind of going through a big boom time. And I mean, there were millions of South Koreans in particular, but folks from across Southeast Asia that were there working on construction sites, etc. During that whole construction boom, kind of in the 90s, I guess. So, but these themes of her parents, yeah, of political movement, through their union work, etc., and displacement are alive and well in her work, and really, really palpable. She produced a commission that honored Korean migrants to the Gulf in 2015. That was called Opaque Wind, and it had sort of an external installation and an internal installation.
So this means that if you're saying the 90s, so that means that she grew up in North Africa because she was born in 1971.
They didn't live there. He went to work there.
Oh, so he left, and her mom and her stayed behind in Korea,
That's my
in South
understanding. I
Korea.
mean, that was the general thing that happened, because often with those arrangements, they don't allow your family to come with you. You are there to work, and that's it. Your
That's
visa,
brutal. Okay. Hmm.
really brutal. I mean, indentured servitude is a way to describe it, which is a way to
Hmm.
describe slavery. And I don't know what particular conditions her father was under, but I mean, you go to Dubai and all of these kind of, Kuwait or wherever. And that is the pretty appalling situation that a lot of these folks are in. When I was working in Iraq, there were a lot of people who were working within the green zone that had pretty appalling conditions. I mean, but yeah, so I doubt that their families would have been able to join them.
Wow, that is brutal. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a wild experience. Okay, they stayed and the dad left, which may have triggered her imagination of whatever is beyond and what it is to work outside, because she ended up in Germany, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So she got her BFA from Seoul National University and graduated with her master's from Strateschule, I think is how it's pronounced, in
Of
Germany
course,
in
absolutely. Perfect
1999.
German, Emily. Honestly,
Thank
no
you.
notes.
I went in with confidence.
Confidence.
So, yeah, exactly. So, she's a professor at that university now. And so, is it strange to you, knowing the art world and artists much better, that she is a university professor? I mean, is that a common thing
Oh,
for?
yes.
Okay.
Yes, of
Okay.
course. At the Beaux-Arts, even in Paris, so the fine art school, like the very famous fine art school in Paris, there are even teachers or these professors, they have studios. So you're studying under the Annette Messager studio, for example, or in the Annette Messager studio. And Annette Messager is a huge artist. So there is this kind of tradition. I guess it seems like a sort of now that I'm thinking about it, almost feels like a remnant from the olden days
Yeah.
when
Because
you
I
had
know.
the master and the disciple, and you had Michelangelo, and then you had all the other ones who also kind of contributed to whatever frescoes they were doing, but it was Michelangelo's. So, of course, there's a bit of that, but then you're starting to yourself become an artist and leave the school and then have your own autonomous career, obviously. But it's not that unusual. In fact, it's
Yeah.
very, very normal that at a certain point, artists are either invited to teach or they want to teach themselves to preserve a certain freedom, to have a steady income. And
Yeah.
what best thing to do than to remain in the school and kind of be within that system in a way.
Yeah, because I mean, Philip Guston, obviously, when we talked about him, he was teaching as well, and you think of like the Bauhaus School. It's like all of the incredible, artists that were there that were teaching at the time. But I guess that I sort of categorize that as something historical that artists did, because I'm in the Hayward Gallery and I'm looking at the immense body of work and this huge solo show, and there's part of me that thinks, well, she must be doing pretty well. I mean, I mean, there's no way she would need to have a steady income outside of what she is doing. But do you think that, and maybe she loves teaching, maybe she loves it and that's a different thing, but it's like, if it's the argument of a steady income, is it conceivable that somebody could be of her stature and still in the art world not have like steady enough or enough income to survive? Would you say that's true?
That's a very, very good question, actually. And I don't think people realize how precarious sometimes being an artist is somehow. Because in her case, I don't know much about her gallery exhibitions. She is represented by a very good gallery, Chantal Crousel in Paris. And this is an international gallery of great status. But I've never seen an exhibition there, like these more commercial, let's say, exhibitions that artists produce for galleries. But looking at her work, think about it, Emily. Even if you live in a palace, how much of those works could you, I mean, how much could she
Yeah,
sell?
that's true.
In
Yeah,
terms
that's a
of
very good point.
dimension, in
Yeah.
terms of there's a thing, a phenomenon, which is that there's institutional artists. So artists who really are interested in producing these incredibly poetic, risque, almost experimental kinds of works that are not fit for other places than big collections such as Pinot that we talked about in regards to Mike
Hmm.
Kelly, or big institutional collections such as the Tate, for example. The
Yeah.
Tate has a huge collection. So there's this phenomenon of artists. Of course, you are very well paid to do an exhibition like this, or you should. She moves around the world, and she does another thing, which is another phenomenon for artists. It's another source of income, which is doing residencies.
Okay.
So there's this, if you're not attached, if you don't have children, and or if your children are older, or if you don't have yet children, there's another way for you to create and to find ways to produce and to exist, which is doing residencies. And that's one of the things she did, and that's one of the things that actually created one of the works in the exhibition called Storage Piece. She was
Yeah.
moving about, and at a
Right.
certain point, she didn't even have a place to live, let alone a place to store her work. And therefore, she had a huge problem in her hands because she had a burgeoning career, not a lot of money, but a lot of invitations to be part of exhibitions across Europe. So she
Yeah.
produced a lot of work. And when it came back to her, where does she put it? So, that's and I think you're asking yourself these questions because this exhibition is so clever that it talks about how she incorporates what it is to be a creative person in the world
She
with
does. Yeah.
objects, right? I mean, we're going to talk about it, but I think that planted these questions in your mind, and I applaud her for that. That's incredible, and I applaud you as well because not
Hmm.
everyone thinks about these things.
Hmm.
I am being
Yeah.
so professional. What is wrong with me? Sorry, why am I applauding you? Help.
But she was pretty successful from the jump. I mean, she graduated in 1999 and had a first solo exhibition in 2000 in Barbara Vine's gallery in Berlin. So, I mean, and I can imagine that was a cracking show. Like I tried to find some stuff on it. I couldn't, but
I love your passion.
yeah, yeah. I mean, she's really got to me this one. But I mean, and I'll just say, so she primarily works in sculpture, prints, collage, installation, as kind of an overview. And they include ideas of myths and legends that she grew up with every day growing up, and then articles, like very domestic articles as well. So drying racks, light bulbs, radiators, other appliances. Venetian blinds are a big one, which I thought she used to chef's kiss, beautiful execution there. But and her works are really sensory, so movement is a big thing, and the sculptures and installations move, but there's light and sound involved where you just feel like you're moving within it. And movement is such a big thing for her. Obviously, we talked about political movements, the movement of your person from, being geographically unbound. I mean, her father was, she is. That's a big part of her story, but also just like physical movement. So the very, very tactile things she has that my hands wanted to touch so badly and move. I mean, she works with bells a lot, and I mean, some of the
I
things
was
you can
hoping there was a
touch.
security issue in this episode as well with you, Emily.
I'm
But
shocked.
it might have happened with me. I'll tell you about it
Oh,
later.
teaser, teaser. Yeah, that's funny. But yeah, so that's kind of the broad picture of kind of how she works. And this exhibition in and of itself is called, this is another sort of curator question for you. It is called a survey rather than a retrospective. Is there a
Oh,
difference?
yes. So that's a bit of a conundrum because it almost means the same thing.
I was going to say it sounds like a distinction without a difference, but
Well, there is a difference based upon age, which means that, and that's a funny thing with her because in the beginning of her career, she made two catalog raisonnés when she'd only had like 5 years of existence as an
Yeah.
artist, probably including her student years. And she says in an interview, I was quite aware of the fact that a catalogue raisonné was everything you produced. And I just found the idea really compelling to really look at everything I had made. And you
Mm.
feel that she has that kind of mind, that she wants to really focus on everything she produces, because the dates of some of her works are like 2001, 2021,
Hmm.
for example, and she goes back to some series. And so it's really interesting because the catalogue raisonné would go with the retrospective exhibition or even a posthumous exhibition. So a retrospective exhibition is like, you will have had produced so much work, you're revered, you probably have some lots of prizes, lots of accolades, and now we're going to go through all your work and all the phases of your work in your life. And so certain artists, even when they are of a certain age, say, I will not say who told me that, they're like, no, 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 I don't want to do a retrospective, like, come on, I'm not old,
Yeah. Right.
and some artists are really happy to get to that point, like, okay, I'm going to work on a retrospective. A survey is more what she likes to do. I think it really defines even her
Okay.
process, which is to go over her production, go over what she's done, and organize it in a way by themes, chronologically, however you want to do it. And it's kind of overlooking a body of work that doesn't have to comprise each element of the whole career, let's say.
Right. Okay. And that's true for this one. I mean, this one is definitely thematic and does not go chronologically. And, looking through some of her other work, there's clearly a lot that was not included in this necessarily. But cool. So do you want to like bring us into the exhibition?
Sure. I just want to add that so in terms of her life, she was very European at a certain point. So she moved to Germany. She studied in Germany. She did lots of residencies all around the world. She spent some time in Paris. And then in 2015, she had a big exhibition in Seoul, in Liam Museum. And so she spent some time in Korea and kind of
Yeah.
went back to Korea, bought a studio there, or rented a studio there, and so established herself from there on between South Korea and Germany. So there was a process in her life, as far as I understand, where she left, she moved out, she became very European. She de-orientalized herself, as she puts it in an interview, or her work absorbed a lot of things. She's very curious. She's very interested in practices across the world. She does lots of investigations. And then going back to South Korea brought back an interest in certain practices and the politics of those practices that we're going to talk about later, because it does come up in the exhibition. So I think that's an important thing to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, exhibition.
Great.
So, the Hayward Gallery is a brutalist building within the South Bank. I forget.
Yeah.
South
The
Bank what?
South Bank kind of complex. There's
Complex.
a whole
Yes.
bunch there. Yeah.
So it's a beautiful complex and a beautiful gallery by the River Thames. Brutalist architecture, cement, grey, but of a certain period. So it's not a sort of rectangular thing and just a huge gallery. There's
Yeah.
these kind of nooks and these spaces, and it's a really interesting building. And it's interesting as well because you open a door. So it's not like at the Tate where everything's open and you just go through an entrance that has no door that opens or closes. And so here, and this is to tell you how she thinks of space as well. It's really interesting what she does. So when you're, so you, the thing is, when you're going to see an exhibition, or maybe it's just me because I'm an excited little bunny, but you kind of like go into the space and you don't think about it. You just want to see it, want to be inside.
Yeah.
But she marks the thresholds. So there's someone at the door who tells you, as you are about to open the door, well, you can go in. So go in. But there's an artwork that you can touch. So it's not this one, it's that one. And of course, I go into a complete panic because if you give me instructions, I'm super focused. I'm like,
Hold on, let me write that down. What was that? Okay.
or I can touch something. What? Yeah, what? You know? So I go like, I'm gonna get this wrong, you know, and this kind of like feeling of, of doom that this is not gonna work. So you go, and as you went, so not only do you have that experience, but as you went, there's a curtain of little ropes made by bells, by these circular bells that jingle.
Like jingle bells. Yeah, kind of.
Jingle bells that produce that jingling sound as you enter the exhibition. So you're not in the exhibition, and already it's quite the experience.
Yeah.
And you announce your arrival, and you feel that you're passing a threshold of some kind. And then there's a huge installation of.
Sorry, just to say that I did not get any warning. No
Oh,
one told me anything when I
you're
went in.
joking. Was
So
I being pranked?
I went in, I opened the doors and I saw that, the curtain of bells in front of me, and I just went to the side and walked around it. Like, I was like, "Oh,
Whoops!
obviously, I'm
Don't
not
touch.
supposed to yeah, exactly. I know I've had this experience before. I don't wanna leave in handcuffs, okay?
I know
Like,
this.
yeah,
I've been
yeah,
scolded before. Someone went through my phone and my pictures before. I'm not
yeah.
going to go through this again.
Exactly. So I went around it, and it wasn't until and I just didn't even really consider it at all. And it wasn't until I sort of got to the other side of the room, and then I saw or heard somebody else come in. It was like jingle, 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 and I was like, no way, I missed
No.
that. So when I go back with Peter, I'm not going to tell him anything, and I want him to
Okay.
just walk ahead of me and
So now I'm
live through
really
him.
puzzled
Yeah.
because I presumed that. So you enter. So let me not get ahead of myself here. So you enter, and there's this beautiful installation with drying racks, these white,
Yeah.
weird, almost anthropomorphic shapes, and these cables that have these lamps, these
Hmm.
lit lamps at the end. So these electric cables that go up to the ceiling, go into the drying racks, go up to the ceiling again, then go into the drying racks. There's white cables, black cables, and there's lights, light bulbs everywhere. And it's this really beautiful thing. And so I spent about 5 minutes caressing the cables.
Amazing.
I'm sorry, Hayward Gallery, if you're listening.
Amazing.
I had no idea that they were talking about the curtain because for
Oh,
me,
wow. So you thought that was the bit you could touch, was the
yes,
cables.
and
That's
I'm still
amazing.
not sure. Do you think? Because listen, can you reason with me? So you have a curtain. So because now you're throwing me off because you have a curtain. How can you go through a curtain without touching it? That's what I
So
don't.
so there's a gap between the curtain and the wall,
I didn't see
and
it.
I walked in,
I was so
and
nervous.
I was just like, "Oh, well, clearly I'm not supposed to touch anything. I've been told
Can't believe
before."
it. Then you were like, hands up.
Yeah,
No.
yeah. Shimmy to the side, get out the
I
gap.
was like,
Yeah.
went through the curtain, touched all the cables. And like, oh my gosh, I
That's
can't believe
amazing. And nobody was
oh,
there, like, shaking a finger at you?
one. And I saw people looking
Was
I'm
it
losing
busy
it.
when you were there? Was it
Yeah,
like
I saw people looking at me like, what is she
like,
doing?
"Girl, get a grip,
Pull
okay?
yourself
It's an
together, woman.
electrical cord." Yeah.
And also, this is an art exhibition. What people don't know how to behave anymore.
Yeah.
I just felt these looks. And then at a certain point, I was touching a cable. I was like, why am I touching
Oh my God. And this is the woman who did an episode on exhibition etiquette. There we have
exactly?
it.
Oh my God.
Oh, that's
Why?
hilarious. That's hilarious.
It did make me follow the cables. It was a completely sensorial experience because I just followed the cables up
Wow.
and then was like, oh, so this one goes there. I'm going to touch that one. And then at a certain point, I was like, why? This doesn't add anything to the
Oh my
experience,
God. Wow, you were like, "Yeah, I'm into it, but I'm not really sure what the." Can you imagine if because those drying racks, these are like the kind of drying racks you buy at IKEA or whatever, and there's like one stacked on top of another, and then those cords are kind of going through it so that the lights
Yeah,
can
yeah.
be in there.
So my realization was I hear the jingling sound and I turn around and I see a child playing with the jingle bells, the curtain,
Yeah,
and a security looking at the child like really. And I just think, okay, so maybe they thought I worked at the Hayward because, not to bury the lead again, later on, there's a sort of text on the wall telling you that you
yeah,
can ask someone from the staff to activate sculptures for you. So the
sure.
sculptures are supposed to be that some of them are
Yeah,
supposed to be touched. And I think they probably thought the security guard probably thought, oh, this is a curator I didn't know, and or this is a
right.
technician that's kind of checking if everything's fine, or I just know
That's
that I
amazing.
shouldn't be saying this recorded.
Because you probably went up there with, like, absolute confidence, you
Like you
know?
pronounced Straderschule,
Yeah.
exactly the same way, same
Who knows if
confidence.
it's right? But you know what? I'm doing it. I'm touching this stuff. But there's also in the exhibition, one of the ones in that room that you can activate or have the staff activate is there's a giant jingle bell rope,
Mhm, mhm.
that kind of goes it's pretty substantial. It goes all the way to the top, really high ceiling, kind of has a kind of a lagging connecting bit, and then it goes down. There's a shorter side that hangs
Mhm,
down, and
mhm.
so it's a rope. It's to mimic a rope, which is a bit of folklore about a couple of kids that were running from a tiger, and they
To a
asked
brother and a sister, I think.
exactly, and they asked for a rope to come down that they could climb to like save them. And they climbed the rope, and when they got up to the heavens or whatever, the girl became the sun and the boy became the moon, and that's sort of the origin story in Korean folklore of the sun and the moon. But there's that sign there that says that you can activate that. I didn't see the sign, but I saw a guy go over there and like start spinning
Oh
the
god.
rope. And again, it's like I've learned my lesson, right? I have taken the message on board to follow the rules at exhibitions. And I was kind of looking at him and I was like, is there a badge there? Is he official? So I was kind of looking at it, and he was in fact official. And then
Oh,
he
so you
very kindly.
saw one of the sculptures be activated, because that's
Yeah,
one of the things. So regularly people go there, people from the Hayward Gallery obviously, and activate the sculpture. So you very regularly have sound immediately. Well, that room is full of sound because people, I mean, the Hayward Gallery is always busy, so there's always people going in, and then that rope is activated again. So quite an eventful start to the exhibition, basically. And then you have two works that are quite interesting, and there are kind of works from the beginning. I think 2008, around that time. So one of them is, and I keep forgetting the name of that work, so I'm going to see in the catalog, Social Conditions of the Sitting Table, which is from
yeah.
2001. And it's a photographic piece with a little text, so quite conceptual.
Hmm.
So really a work from the beginning where she had a more social and political stance, let's say. And there are photographs of sitting tables, which is apparently a South Korean or maybe a Korean phenomenon of making these makeshift tables that are made with found materials, I think,
Yeah.
and they're supposed to be in front of shops. And they are used for everything, basically. You can lean onto them, you can put things on them. And I didn't understand the purpose of those tables. I just understood that they are a dying tradition, and she kind of wanted to document it
Yeah.
because it's disappearing and it's a very moving object.
Yeah, and I loved it though. I mean, I love the whole simple notion of let's just create this table that people can kind of do what they need to do. And I mean, going back to where we opened up with this book I'm reading on social capital and Robert Putnam's work, it's like that's how that little things like that help engineer community that is more connected. And yeah, I loved those.
Yeah, I love that piece as well because it is also a piece, and that's why I say that I didn't quite understand the purpose of it, because it's one of those idiosyncrasies, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things that probably for Koreans are like, sure, the sitting table,
Yeah.
obviously. And for us, like,
Obviously.
but wait, so you put stuff on it, but then you sit on it? Why is it called
Yeah.
sitting table? Because you use
You don't
tables
sit
for
on a
sitting,
table. You sit
Yeah,
on a
exactly.
bench. Yeah.
And it also shows the difference in body behavior. And then I did some research, and there's something called, it's not a sitting table, but there's these exterior tables that are quite wide. And they're used in Korea for people to lie down in the garden, to sit,
Ah,
to have a picnic. They're even in gardens. So a whole different use of tables. And
love it.
I thought that was so clever to put that in there because, okay, the jingle bells, it is a reference to a sound that is used in rituals in the whole of Asia, really, not really only in Korea. You may see it or not, you may kind of get the gist of it, but then you get a very specific reference whereby you are in touch with a culture that is uber specific. Then there's a super specificity of this piece that I really loved. I thought it was so clever. And then on the side of it, you have a work called Dehors, which means outside. She
Mm-hmm.
probably did it when she was doing her residency in Paris. It's a slide piece, so it's a slide projector projecting these old drawings. And I noticed that each one of them, each page, so they're kind of scanned or photographed,
Yeah.
and each page has these parts that are marked or hidden with a marker, black marker, and it's all the same kind of color, a bit yellowish drawings or
Mm-hmm.
prints of these urban organization of space. So, this modernist idea of the city, this utopian idea of what it is a city by the seaside, what it is a leisure space in the city, what it is high rises, how are they together in the city, how are they placed along the streets, how are the streets organized. It's a very kind of, and I like the yellow part of it, it's a bit
Mm.
melancholy, and you see side by side these two aspects that you're going to traverse the whole show. Even though she let go of the more social thing, she's more interested in biography, but she lets go of that kind of social and almost anthropological aspect to the
Mm.
image of the image, and she goes on to materials. But it's really interesting to see that she's really looking at the effects that modernism had on cultures that weren't the breeding grounds of those
Yeah.
shapes and those ideals and those utopias. So that was interesting. And then there's a big installation of abstract drawings
Yeah.
made with sanding paper, these cones that end with kind of these circular shapes, and on tracing paper
Yeah.
that she either purchased or she made. She produced herself. She designed herself, that have kind of these squares coming out, so they're no longer really. It's not tracing paper. Sorry, it's millimetric paper. You call it that
Hmm.
paper that has kind of the
The
lines,
grids.
the
The grids.
grids
Yeah.
marked
Yeah.
for architecture and technical drawing. And then you have a photograph printed and on the wall, that
Enormous.
depicts
Yeah.
it's huge, it's black and white, and depicts a
Mm-hmm.
sort of garden exterior, and those kind of very abstract shapes are on top of it. And so that's the very eventful entrance of the
Yeah.
exhibition.
And so in that first room, I talked to the docent that was doing the
The
twirling of
shaking of the rope.
yeah, exactly. And then he told me the whole folklore story about the
Mm.
kids. And then I was chatting with another guy who worked at the gallery, and he was telling me about the Van Gogh exhibition that, like, really
At the
immersive.
National Gallery.
That's it, yeah.
Hmm.
And he was saying how much he loved it and da da da. And there was part of me that was like, he's waxing really lyrical about, grandmasters. I wonder what he thinks of this show. And then he started just effusively talking about the Haegue Yang show, and he was like, "Oh, and there she is. She just walked through. She just walked through the
No,
exhibition." I was like, "What?
again,
No way."
Emily.
I know. I was like, "Wow, so she's here," which I find very exciting and distracting at the same time,
Always.
because it's
You're the
like,
only person this shouldn't happen to, because you get distracted by the presence of the artist.
totally, totally. And then I'm like, "Oh wow, is that, but she literally just walked, like, through the floor, across the floor, and then went down to the lower ground floor because, and we'll get to this, she has a bit of the exhibition that she puts up week by week. So every Tuesday
Hmm.
she goes in and decides how to change the exhibition, which also makes it feel very alive.
Just a note to say that Drip Drop Blob Dance Trustworthy number 2028 is the title of these abstract drawings that I'm trying to describe.
Yeah.
And they're from 2013. And then the picture in the background is called Poetics of Displacement, and it's from 2011. So there's really, I mean, she really drops a few hints, even this idea of abstraction. And if you buy the catalog, there's one of the very few really interesting texts that I've read, I haven't finished yet, about abstraction.
Mm.
Really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And what it is that an artist like her is taking from the history of abstraction, and what that history is besides the European history.
Oh, cool.
It's
Yeah.
really interesting. So then you go to the second level of the exhibition. Then you can kind of see from that ground level. She again included the staff of the institution to decide on what color that whole room would be painted in.
Oh, really? I missed that.
Yes,
Huh.
it's written, yeah, there's a little label that says that that color was chosen by the team that was working with her.
I love that.
And they chose an almost Yves Klein blue because Yves Klein, the artist, invented a blue. I
Huh.
think he even patented it. Patented it. Not sure about what I'm saying, but I mean, it's his blue, so it's known as the Yves Klein blue, and that blue is very close to it. So he produced many paintings in that blue, and um, sculptures, objects, etc. Yves Klein, I mean. So that's and it's the Yves Klein blue is radiating. It
Mm-hmm.
radiates. It's a very peculiar color because it's very dense, and at
Mm-hmm.
the same time it has a form of it has some light at the same time. It's deep and light. So it's a very strong room with these incredible sculptures and these lines stenciled on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this whole activity, this whole movement on the ground that are seemingly, I presume, notations for the movement of the sculptures because
Mm-hmm.
all the sculptures move.
Yeah.
And then there's another work on the wall that is text, like pages of books, onto these rather unremarkable circles. or shapes. They're not
Yeah,
quite circular, but they become circular because you can activate them or you can
right.
make them rotate really quickly until they form a perfect circle. And the pages, the book pages, are about activists, writers, creative people who are politically active.
Hmm.
So there's a reference to Ghassan Kanafani, I think, a Palestinian writer and activist. There's references to many, to very different people from all over the world.
Hmm.
And I kind of sensed it might have been a reference to her mum as well. I mean, she always has this idea, and she talks about it in an interview, that for her, it was kind of a territory where she couldn't go because her family were political, they were activists, and she's an artist. So, how do you articulate these spaces of action?
That room feels alive. You are there in the midst of all of it. I mean, you cannot help but be a part of what is happening in that room because of because you're literally in the middle of it. So all of these sculptures, or well, there's one hanging from the ceiling that has the Venetian blinds, but the rest of
Oh, right.
them are all on caster wheels, so you can see that they move, and they look like friendly objects. They look like structures you might want to jump into. So
Oh, there's stacked corners, ventilating orange and blue square, which is really beautiful. So this is the first time we encounter works made with Venetian blinds. So Venetian blinds really are a staple of her creation. She really uses them repeatedly.
yeah.
So there's that one. There's reflected red blue cubist dancing mask, which is supposed to hide your whole body and to kind of have these shapes a little bit like an African mask because modernism was so inspired by African masks.
Right.
And you're supposed to make it swirl and hide behind it, but it's like this deep blue. Then there's these red. It looks like the game Tangram. I don't know if I think we are the only
Mm,
family who has that game. It's like these geometric pieces, and you have a card with a shape, and you have to recreate the shape with like a triangle, a square, these different pieces. And it's sometimes quite kind of hard. You can spend like 35 minutes on it. And it made me think of that. Then they
mm.
can become shapes like almost anthropomorphic, or boats or objects or animals. It's quite Asian, actually. I think it's probably an Asian game. And this piece kind of made me think of that. There's the Randing intermediates. So some of them are part of the group of works that she calls the intermediates,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
So do you want to explain what those are?
They're very colorful, they're very tactile, they have kind of knobs and sort of ribbons coming out of them. And when I was there was almost a pair of women that were getting very close to touching them because you almost can't help yourself. And the
Oh my
docent was
gosh.
over very quickly to say, "No, I'm sorry, you can't touch these." You know, they do have the the gallery staff come and operate them and kind of move them around from time to time. That didn't happen while I was there, but the experience of being in the middle of that, because there's the objects that move, there are these friendly aliens, there's this African kind of mask-ish sculpture you talked about, and then there's the ones that you could get in, like with the Venetian blinds, and then there's another big structure with the jingle bells and the Venetian blinds that someone actually does get in the middle of to operate. And it felt like that feeling of being a kid and getting a big box and playing house, like
Yes,
it's
yeah.
really small, but I want to be in there and feel what it feels like to be in there, and things will change. I will feel differently in that space. And that's what it felt like looking at those. But then being in the center of it, because the other thing that these sculptures do is play with light, and there's light, around, and the shadows that they cast are remarkable. and they're casting those shadows on a floor that have these sketches that you described on them. So it is just a swirling, a feeling of being in something that is alive, because they can all move, and they can all move, and in the back of your mind you're kind of half waiting for them to do so, and half waiting for your own hands to just touch them. I could empathize with those two ladies so much.
So these intermediates are parts of, and that's why it's very hard to describe them, because they are parts of a project. So from the moment where in 2015 she went to Seoul and she had that big exhibition at the Lium Museum, she started working with basket weaving, with lots of traditional crafts that are not. So the status of those crafts is not the same as in Europe, or let's say in the Occidental world, or at least in the system of the arts in Europe and America, and and the other countries touched by our notion here of the arts and the arts hierarchies. So for us, crafts, unfortunately, always comes kind of at the bottom, the kind of lesser arts.
Yeah.
In Korea, not so much. So it's complex. There's a big museum of crafts. It's taken seriously. It's collected. It's revered. So much so that when she tried to learn, no one wanted to teach her. Like they didn't understand what she was doing. And she finally found a kind-hearted, open-minded person who taught her and who was willing to help her. And so started this project. And it's hard to describe because it's kind of like baskets gone crazy. Like suddenly, rather than being open and carrying stuff, they kind of close up. Then they have these beautiful dégradé colors, blues and yellows, oranges and reds. Then there's stuff coming off of them, and then suddenly they look like sea animals, sea creatures. There's another creature that makes me think a bit of a piñata, with these cones coming off of it, and these really beautiful colors that just really work well together somehow. It's kind of lime green and red, and this kind of mid intensity blue, and it's complex. And then they have handles, and that's really interesting because there's this haptic quality to the work. And it's true that I maybe am way too well behaved, or perhaps traumatized by being pranked by a security guard as I entered. And for me, it was out of the question. Like I was not touching anything else in this exhibition. And I was not lucky. Like no one activated anything while I was there. And I was really taken by the whole room. And there's another piece that is kind of homage to Sol LeWitt. I don't think we have time to talk about her love for Sol LeWitt, just to say that the notion of leap, so leap year, is a leap year, obviously, a gap year or whatever. But the notion of leap for Sol LeWitt is applied in terms of being in a sort of technical form of existence or action, and then leaping to the same thing can leap into a conceptual existence, for example. So there's a sort of a leap. And he says that artists are mysticists rather than rationalists. They can leap to conclusions that, reason cannot support. So for her, the idea of leap is really important. And she loves Sol LeWitt. There's lots of, or she emulates him somehow. Titles are great. I think that the thing with her that I so admire is that everything is so carefully thought through, but with a poetic kind of simplicity. She has another exhibition. She had a big retrospective exhibition at the Ludwig Museum in 2018 that was called ETA 1998-2018, which is just genius. Estimated time of arrival 1998, and which probably was the survey, between those years of production. So she has this kind of notion of time and space as a sort of a movement between forms of consciousness almost. It's so interesting.
I think that's so right. I think you've really hit the nail on the head, because I While I was going through the exhibition, I kept feeling this notion or hearing this phrase of, this feels like fully formed ideas.
Mm,
That, and I couldn't really pinpoint what I even meant by that. But I
mm,
think what you're saying is just that there's some things that are simple. Like, I mean, even the Venetian blinds they're kind of simple in their own way. I mean, they're a simple structure in and of themselves. But you get the sense, like, there can be simplicity that is lightweight and simplicity that is not,
that is
that has
deep,
a lot
has
of
depth.
gravity to it.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
she is that latter. And
Mm,
I love that it's almost ineffable kind of to really pinpoint what that, it's a distinction with a huge difference, and
yeah.
yeah, she's great. I mean, I loved, just going back to the kind of basket weaving animals. That was they're not animals necessarily. I mean, they were kind of inspired by um, Japanese and Korean, like those giant puppets that they have in
Yes.
parades,
Yes.
that take many people to perform with, that are phenomenal to watch. So they're sort of smaller versions of those somehow. And that was the only place I felt like they were all kind of cramped in a corner. I was like, I want them to be, I wanted a big space.
But so you go up the stairs, and as you go up, you enter a room that has a lot of the works with Venetian blinds. There's separations made by
Yeah,
Venetian blinds, which is kind of the most chaotic room, let's say, where she tried to cram a lot of stuff in there.
yeah.
There's a big piece called, I think, Rue Benoit. It's a street
Mm.
where Marguerite Duras lived
Oh, yes,
in
yeah,
Paris,
yeah.
but she doesn't state. I mean, there's lots of texts explaining lots of stuff in the exhibition, so you get a lot of information from the texts. And so apparently that piece is based on every appliance she had at home at the time. And it's the exact size of Marguerite Duras's apartment, or
Hmm.
one of the rooms. So there's a sort of superimposition between two lives. And across the exhibition, there are these references of people that she kind of merges with in some way. So there's her mom, there's those political activists that are mentioned downstairs. There's Marguerite Duras, who obviously, and this is the apartment where she lived while, from memory, she was waiting for her husband to come back from the war, and he
Mm.
comes back emaciated, like to a point where he looked
Oh,
like he was dead to her. It was a kind
wow.
of a. There's a book called, I think it's La Vie Matérielle, Material Life, where she talks about this. And so so it's that period, like in a very strange period, which is akin to her own life, where she just South Korea just came out of a dictatorship. Her father went through what he went through, and then she kind of emerges in a freer life, a freer
Yeah,
context.
yeah.
And then there's a piece that I loved the most.
Ah,
One of them, which is disappointing because her work is amazing. Her work with materials is incredible, but that just broke me. The texts on the wall. So there's 12 printed A4 pages on the wall, basically, which are a correspondence between her mother and herself,
oh, yeah, yeah.
or where the two of them decided to talk about her mom's arrival in Germany. And so the two of them are talking about the same period of time and how they experienced each other's presence, how
Mm,
the mom experienced Germany, and how Haegue Young experienced the arrival of her mom in Germany, her idea of who her mom was, and who she really was there. And
mm.
I found the story absolutely heartbreaking in its banality, and
Yeah.
its
Was
um
there like the flooding? Wasn't there the flooding of the
so the
bathroom?
mom at some point finds herself taking a bath because that's the thing that connects her to Korea, because in Korea you wash yourself thoroughly, and baths are important. They clean your soul, they have a significance, they're spiritual. And so she goes and draws a bath, And then when she wants to drain the water away, she goes into a panic because there's no drain. And so she calls Haegue Young and says, "What is happening? Your apartment is faulty. There's no drain. Where is the drain? Where is the drain?" She gets really panicky, and only to realize later when her daughter tells her that in Germany people don't bathe like that. That's not how it works. You go into the
Yeah.
bathtub, and you don't just put water all over the bathroom like in Korea.
Yeah.
And again, it's like that piece with the sitting tables. Such a small, she doesn't
Yeah.
need to say a lot. You don't need her biography. You don't need her to tell you 500 anecdotes of the differences between cultures because this is far more deep than that.
Yeah.
This is when you realize in another language that there's a word for something that doesn't exist in some other language that you speak, and you think, what a moment of solitude. There's also this cultural solitude that you
Mm-hmm.
can be in, and this emancipation through things that are so familiar to you that suddenly is not possible, even if you were to do them. There's something that's not magical anymore. There's a lot to say about this piece, and it's against these very cold objects. So one thing to say about Haegue Young that I kind of struggle with a little bit is that the objects are perfect.
Yeah.
They're just, the appliances with the Venetian blinds, with everything's so clean, everything's so perfect, everything's measured to the millimeter,
Yeah.
everything's produced, and the light comes, and suddenly you're looking at the box that's covered with that has a sort of Venetian blinds hiding what's inside, and there's this sunsetty light that emanates through it, and that and everything's just so beautiful and just so elegantly done, and then you uh, realize where that comes from. And there was a sort of a moment there in that room when I was thinking, this makes me think of the aughts, where we were in this kind of effervescence of working with standardized and mass produced materials and having international careers and exhibiting from country to country, guilt free, anything was possible. This was before, obviously, 2008. um, and there's this thing at end of the 90s, and there's this thing sometimes in her work that takes me back to that time, because the use of mass produced materials
Mm.
inevitably will tell me that. It will bring me to that idea of these Venetian blinds are all over the world, and that's her point as well.
Yeah.
You can find them in Brazil, you can find them in Yucatan, you can find them in Porto, you can find them everywhere. Um, but there's also the fact that they're the materials that you're making the work with. And then suddenly the work becomes desensitized because it is using those materials and it's saying that thing. But I think she's talking about culture, and I'm thinking of production. But I can't really separate the two, if that makes
Mm.
sense. So there's a part of me in her work that kind of goes back to that time. And there's a quote of her um, where in an interview in the catalog where she's talking about the way she works that kind of struck me. I'm going to read it to you. So she says, I have been working at Stadelschule, my alma mater, since 2017, and these days my schedule is predetermined by my teaching job and the academic calendar. So you think, oh, she's doesn't have a lot of time to work. And
Yeah.
then she says, during the semester, I stay in Berlin and travel in Europe and North America. So already you're like, oh, leap,
Yeah.
Europe, North America. And during the school break, I do my work in and out of Seoul. Okay, well, that the dimension of her life is huge.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
trying to spend more time in Asia. Last December, for example, I was in Bangkok and Chiang Rai, Thailand for 3 weeks. I spent a couple of days in Manila in March 2024, and I wish to go back to the Philippines soon on a long desired field trip to trace and explore pabalat, the tradition of paper cutting in a Filipino context. Pabalat has a very vague origin. It may have been derived from Chinese paper cutting brought by Chinese merchants, or could could also have been an offshoot of the Mexican technique of papel picado. In this paragraph, since 2017, we've been all over the world.
Yeah.
And to me, and it's also, I have a question, and unfortunately, you're not Asian, you can't tell me, but for me, it's really weird because I keep thinking about, if I'm Portuguese, there's a lot of, arts and crafts in Portugal. What would it mean if an artist went back to basket weavers and started kind of using those techniques to make big objects? And we have an artist who does that, Joana Vasconcelos. And then there's another installation that is about the first work she did in Korea, which was to go back to her grandparents' home that was derelict, basically in shambles, and do an art installation there. And that is absolutely incredible. So she has those two aspects of the migrant who is in the super modern, in Germany, I mean, Germany is not what it was, but in Germany, so a highly historically industrialized country. And at the same time, she has that thing of, I'm going to go back to that home. I'm going to work with origami. Origami might not be the correct word. I don't know if it translates to Korea. I'm going to work with lamps, lights, little objects. And the installations, it's called Sagon 30, I think. It was an exhibition, and she kept the notes that people left about the exhibition that are super moving, and they're projected onto a Venetian blind. And that's where it shifted for me. And I thought, okay, there really is something where she's incredibly honest.
What I'm hearing you say is that she's kept the threads. She hasn't moved around and dropped the threads necessarily of, art that influenced her as a child, or things and experiences she had when she was younger. It's like it's all built in rather than, oh, I'm moving here, so I'm dropping this. It's like, I guess actually, like her big piece of, unpacking all of her
the storage piece.
The storage piece. Yeah, exactly. She takes it with her. Like she's building onto and folding into, rather than, just sort of dropping and being like, okay, now I'm going to go for this very clean, mass produced aesthetic. It's that it all is coming from that place. And yeah, maybe that's where the weight is, is that you can feel that in it. I was just reading this article in the Atlantic by Annie Lowry about, like, basically it was like, women put down the vacuums. It was like it was a thing about domestic labor, and there was a bit
the
in there,
eternal question,
forever, right? And it's like, there's married women do more domestic labor than single women, but married men do not do more domestic labor than single men. Like,
shock.
Yeah, exactly. And her, her kind of point of it was, just put down the value. Like, let's stop killing ourselves for feeling like we need to rise to a standard of very tidy homes, and therefore performing our gender in that way. That's a little off course, but I liked that Haegue Yang was using those very familiar, unimportant domestic objects. I mean, who's looking after the blinds? I have taken a wet rag in my spring cleaning and wiped each and every blind of the thick dust that manages to get caked on there. And, so I feel like my connection to those domestic objects are so deep. I can't even, you don't even realize it, right? Until you see them reflected in the way that she has presented them. And it's like, wow, there is, like, these are the things of our lives. These are the things that are in our homes, and, what we're interacting with every day. And it would be very, very easy to say, that's just very low, and she's not trying to be clever about them.
No,
She's not
that's
trying
true.
to
But what do you
be.
mean by that? I know think, but what do you mean when
Well,
when you say that?
I mean, like Mike Kelly, for example, is very clever. He is being in your face with it. And I'm saying something with this, and this is the thing, and I'm going to shock you a little bit with what I'm saying, or just, kind of give you a barrage of senses with, this thing, this twirling curtain, or whatever it is. And she's not. She's saying this is a thing that we can make a construction from that will be a beautiful object in and of itself, without any kind of tongue in cheek gotcha. I mean, those Venetian blinds, again, with the light and the shadows on the ground and the way that they hold
They're
the images.
suspended in the middle
Yeah.
of the room and create spaces,
Oh,
and our screens that films are projected
oh.
onto. And there's this kind of idea of the ritualization of the everyday life is the deep feeling that the meaning is there as soon as you displace it. It's kind of
Mm,
sad. It's a bit
yeah.
melancholy.
Thinking of those Venetian blind structures, it's like they're very rigid in a way. They're strong. They're cubes stacked on cubes
Mm-hmm.
often,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a very strong looking structure. But then the blinds themselves have that delicacy of letting through the light, and there's something
Mm,
wonderful about the intersection of and the play of that I think makes them just such a pleasure to be in the presence of.
mm.
That it's so much is true about this thing, and it's very simply demonstrating that. So yeah, and it kind of relates to the mesmerizing mesh pieces.
Yeah.
So
So do you want to
she
talk about those? Because
yeah,
that's the her most recent work, basically.
she did them mostly during COVID,
Mm-hmm.
and they're pieces on a wall, and they are. When I first looked at them, my first thought was like, "Oh, tissue paper." It looks like tissue paper because it's very colorful, very delicate paper that she's cut into collages to look like they're like different spirits, I guess. Hold
Where
on, let me just.
there's different groups of them. So some of them are like these patterns, these
Yeah,
shapes, they're more abstract. And there's some that are more figural, let's say, that have these more kind of almost totemic like
yeah.
creatures. Some of them are almost like animals.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them start looking like something and then destructure or adjust structure at some point. And they look like those drawings that you make when you're a kid, where you fold paper and you cut with scissors and then you
Yeah.
open them.
So this was a rabbit hole I went down. Hanji, it's
Oh,
called
okay.
Hanji paper.
Okay. Tell me
And
more.
so if we're going back to the delicate but strong theme, this is absolutely it. So it's made from mulberry bark. Because yeah, when I first saw it, I was like, oh, this is the kind of childlike. It looks like tissue paper. It has that kind of color quality, etc. And then when I was online and she was talking about this hanji paper, that sort of traditional Korean Japanese paper, it's made from the bulk of mulberry trees. The bark is mixed with kind of the slime of other roots. So like
Hmm.
it's put in sort of a vat, and then it's put together with the slime so that it has something that congeals it, a bit like putting an egg in something that you're baking. And then it has to be made by hand, and it's a really artistic process in and of itself to make this paper. But it can last for 1,000 years. The works themselves are really arresting. I mean, they really grab your attention, and they have a lot of presence, whatever the form is. I mean, those sort of totemic figures you were talking about, I would say in particular, but um and it also made me think, just someone who she was in Korea during COVID,
She was stuck there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I just love the fact that she was like, "What do I have to hand? What is near me? And what can I make that's brilliant out of this?" That it just I loved the notion of her kind of being trapped wherever she was, as we all were, and just sitting there and figuring out how to produce these incredible works. Yeah, I just love that.
I read a little bit of the parts of the catalog that talks about them. So she was looking into shamanism. And so these papers are used in shamanistic rituals. Another thing that I thought, particularly when I read that this had to do, so I was arrested by the beauty of it, and I was kind of stuck there looking at them. And then when I read the text that had to do with shamanistic practices, again, I go back to that thing, which is a question in the art world, which is that when you're not a shaman yourself, when you go and take someone else's beliefs through their techniques, or take the techniques outside of the beliefs and outside of the rituals and the practices and the system that they're within, I think there's a lot of questions in there. There's a lot of things that you can ask yourself. What does that mean? Is it a bit soulless,
Hmm.
to come and grab these things, and to then produce these perfect pieces? And then she explains that in order to better convey this context, she enshrined them. So there's around the drawings, there's this frame
Hmm.
that replicates religious or spiritual architectures, temples, as frames. Then I was reading further, and apparently, so we were saying that the arts and crafts are respected in Korea, but there's, again, no one escapes globalism, I guess. So in Korea, there's this phenomenon of even the curator of shamanism in the arts and crafts museum, or in maybe another museum, I may remember incorrectly, is being a bit discriminated. So shamanism is really being discarded in society. It was considered backwards. So if you stay there, you think, okay, so this is a global phenomenon, and all these traditions that existed up until now are dying. But actually, if you read further in the catalog is amazing. I have to say, it's
It
so
is
nice,
good.
easy
Yeah.
to read,
Yeah.
good texts. And so apparently during Confucius' time, shamanism was also not well considered and even dangerous to practice.
Right.
So shamanism has always had this status of this difficult status within Korean society. It complexifies this question that I was asking, which is this. Okay, well, I'm skirting around the term of appropriation. Like, are
Yeah.
you appropriating
Yeah.
something? And what does that mean? You're an immigrant, you go back to your country, and you appropriate these techniques that you haven't even experienced. It's the same with when I see perfect sculptures with basket weaving techniques. There's always this moment where I think, oh, not the question of appropriation, that's not really the thing, but it's that thing of, is art capable of bringing the energy, the beauty, and something from these beliefs and from these practices and from these social structures into society, into culture by doing this? Or is this the symptom of a dying culture and a way perhaps to take it somewhere else, or to pay homage to it and even to mourn it? Because
Hmm.
her creatures are like celebratory creatures, I like parade creatures.
For sure. I mean, yeah, yeah. So, I mean, is it a case of she should leave this work to people who feel it?
Oh no, I would not
Okay.
ever say or prescribe anything to anyone. I think if there's a compulsion to make, there's a question to be asked. I think it's a valid question. I don't
Mm,
have the answers for it. And I
sure.
loved the exhibition. I really, really loved the exhibition. I think good art asks these questions. And
Mm,
we ourselves do things, consume things, produce things that may be symptoms of problematic situations of gentrification.
Sure.
I
Yeah,
don't
for
like
sure.
bistros in Paris. They're uncomfortable. I prefer Starbucks, much more comfortable. I never go there because I have principles.
Yeah.
But if you give me a good pub or a good cafe, let's say, with the good couches, I don't like the bistro. I would love the bistro to disappear. I don't like it. But
Yeah.
it's a tradition, right? So
Yeah, sure, sure.
this is a very, very silly example, but you know what I mean? I'm not prescribing anything. I'm asking questions because I
Sure.
think these works make you think of these things. And in the text and in her interviews, you can see that she's thinking about these things. She's thinking like any migrant would. I think migration enhances those experiences of loss,
Yeah.
and of transmission and of political programs that cancel out a lot of ways of existing. I mean, the Portuguese dictatorship ended oral dialects. There's only one surviving dialect in the
Yeah.
Portuguese metropolitan area. That's my question. That's
It is
just
a good question. Yeah. I mean, and kind of like how essential is the death? Like death of a dialect, or death of a culture, or death of a thing is a natural state of affairs as well, I guess. So it's like but how much and under what conditions?
yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah, that's it. Under what conditions? If it's dying a natural death,
Yeah.
like Latin did, sure.
Yeah.
It's a very specific, and I think her pointing out to shamanism is connected with abstraction, with her immense knowledge of contemporary art, and how I think we mentioned this, or I mentioned this somewhere in another episode. We're looking at the history of modernism as very, very patriarchal and even imperialistic because Picasso was inspired by African masks, and kind
Yeah.
of invented cubism. Do you know what I mean? So there's
Yeah.
this thing of really being very careful now
Yeah.
with maybe deeper connections to images. Contemporary art is not an Asian notion, it's an imported notion. So she is working in something that was a colonization,
Yeah.
of the Asian, or let's say of Korea, but also the Asian continent and culture. There was no contemporary art. There's it's a practice that is imported. And in the beginning, in the museums in Korea, you mostly had European or American exhibitions. You didn't have
Mm.
Korean artists showing, and she was one of the first artists to show in the Leo Museum. And she's also talking to professionals and to the museum. What does it mean to have an exhibition that is ongoing, that you
Mm.
have to activate, and that you have to reinstall, which is storage piece?
Yeah, it's hard to describe without describing the room that it's in. So there's sort of three interconnecting rooms, and all of the walls between them are sort of normal from the ceiling until about three quarters of the way down, and then they're like you can see the frame of the wall, and then there are like sandbags underneath the wall in the frame. So it's kind of like this unfinishedness, I
Hmm.
guess,
Hmm.
and this that you kind of it's almost like these bags are the kind of bags of sand or something that you might
Hmm.
throw on the side of a river that's overflowing. But there so it's in quite an unique space in and of itself. And then storage piece is this huge pallet filled with packaged up pieces of her art. And there's a rope around it. And when I was there, which was great too, they were putting up new works of art on the wall. So they had just, as I walked into the room, they were,
I
it's
definitely need to visit exhibitions with you, Emily.
come with
Nothing was
me.
activated,
Yeah.
nothing was, you know, displaced. The artist wasn't there.
Wasn't there. She sort of consults with the museum staff about which ones to put up and how to hang them and stuff like that. So I assume that's what she was in the gallery for. It's kind of a very artfully packed palette, wouldn't you say? I mean, it's sort of abnormally high in a way, and it just shows you everything that she has had to bring around with her as an artist who's been creating art for 25 years.
It really is quite something to bring such perfect objects, like I was saying, like these absolutely immaculately produced pieces of art, and then to have that rubbish
Yeah,
there, you know.
yeah.
I don't know. I'm with you. It was an amazing. I really want to go back. And by the way, Emily, I want to understand what I did. Did I touch the wrong sculpture?
Yes, you did. Yes.
And on that note, it's a
He
wrap.
was talking about the bell curtain.
I'm
Easily
sorry, Haegui
done.
Young.
Easily done. You know, what can you
Oh,
do? Well, this was great. I mean, I have to say, I knew nothing about Haegue Yang before this exhibition, which not that uncommon for me. But
oh, I didn't know much, to be very honest with you.
yeah, the guy at the gallery that I was talking to was saying how, she just isn't that well known in the UK. Obviously much more so in Berlin, but yeah, what a treat. What an absolute treat for the senses. I mean, it felt like her storage piece, she was just reaching back in her cultural history and her own memory and her own ideas and just unfolding them and presenting them in a way that one could relate to. I mean,
Mm,
which I think is such a difficult thing to do. I mean, I felt like I could understand something about what her experience was, this migrant experience, and relate that to my own, which is the thing. But yeah, so it was brilliant. So thank you. It was lovely chatting with you about it.
this was delightful. And don't forget, visit exhibitions because we visit them so that you have to.
Yeah,
Take care.
exactly. All right, brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Joanna. Take care.
Bye bye.